What's up? Hey, hello, everyone. Wow. So today we are back going to be talking about Survivor Season 38, The Edge of Extinction, with this live tribal council. So my name is Rachel.
And I'm Alyssa, and man, this tribal council, I was a little worried because I was watching it and they were going to tribal, and it was like, there's still like at least 15 minutes left in the episode. What's going on?
No, the immunity challenge was literally 10 minutes into the episode, and I'm like, oh, is this like a double episode in 1 hour where they do one tribal at the 30 and one tribal at the hour? And then, literally, with 30 minutes left in the episode, we were already at tribal council. It was so crazy fast paced. I was like, wow, this is so weird that we're having tribal with 30 minutes left in the episode. Something big has got to go down because usually tribal doesn't happen till like the 45 or 50 at the hour.
Yeah, I think it's like tribal, like stuff happens at tribal, but normally this much stuff doesn't happen at tribal. And so I was expecting like maybe an idol play or like people having to revote or go to rocks or something because I was like, what is going to take that long? But then it was the crazy thing that we saw. And I was so excited because it was so much fun to watch. I was like happy to watch it.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. With everything, I think last week we were talking about like if this live tribal council didn't happen this week, I think we could have potentially seen the double idol play or even triple idol play if Lauren plays her idol as well, because like we saw in the episode, both David, Devins, and Kelly all had like a talking confessional about potentially playing their idols this episode. So I think either way, we would have had a very interesting tribal council.
Yeah, and I just thought it was interesting because both David and Kelly would have been right to play their idols, I think, if Tribal had gone the way people were planning before it was supposed to happen, just because both David and Kelly came up as like names of people that should maybe be going out. So that was super cool. I think it's really interesting to be able to see how like the returning players are very like in tune with like the game's wavelength just because David and Kelly are like, I love them both so much.
Yeah, I mean, they keep being targets at every vote. Like Kelly's name has come up every single tribal council, basically. David's name has started to come up more. They are such big targets, and somehow Kelly at least has managed to hold on to this idol for this long after being a target since day 3 of this game, which I think it's just so crazy. And like you're saying, I think it's so interesting to see how being a returning player gives you such a leg up on the season, because they've all had confessionals of like, oh, my spidey senses are tingling, like no one's looking at me in camp, something's up, this is so weird. And it's just that gut feeling, whereas people who have never been voted out before don't have that sort of gut feeling or know like, oh, when should I play the idol? What's the feeling of being voted out? Because you don't know what that feeling is until you are voted out. And I guess Devins has semi that feeling as well because he's been voted out once and then has come back into the game. But I definitely can see how much of an advantage being a returning player on the all newbie season truly is, because Kelly and David are just so in tune with everything that's happening, like socially, idol wise, everything around them and their surroundings. And I'm like, wow, I wish I were that good at just being so aware of your surroundings. It's so amazing to watch.
Yeah, and just like Kelly and David, their relationship is also really interesting as the two returning players because they keep like voting together and then not voting together and then voting together. And it's like when they like turned around when David like tapped on Kelly's shoulder and was like, hey, remember me? I was like, oh, they're just, I love them together. I would be really, really happy if both of them got to the final 3 somehow because that would just be an insane final tribal, I think. So I'm getting ahead of myself though. I just really love David and Kelly.
Yeah, I think like we've mentioned it in the previous podcast, like it's such an interesting relationship how they sort of realize that like, okay, we're the two returning players left in the game. we're sort of down on the numbers with the Lesu kind of faction. And then it's really interesting how they are able to like put their differences aside and work together on votes. And then we see like this episode, potentially they were targeting each other. Kelly wanted to vote David out. In the pre-merge, David was very on board to vote Kelly out. And then even in this episode, David was like, what was the other plan? And Kelly was like, blatantly, it was you.
Yeah,
Straight
I thought that was super
face.
funny too.
Yeah, and
It's
I'm
like,
just
oh
like,
yeah, it was
wow.
you. Especially because he didn't even seem to like care that much that it was him. Like he wasn't like, well, now I'm not gonna work with you because you almost voted for me. And I think you could see also the jury's reaction to like how funny they found that. So
Yeah, because it's like such an interesting relationship. You're able to put your differences aside, or like you just both know that you're such big targets that you need to work together and you don't have that many other options right now, or like it's smarter to work together at this moment, even if you don't want to go to the end with the other person. I'm like, wow, this is such a cool relationship to see. And that's something that I guess, Rick sort of came around with this episode after last week when he was like straight up to War Dog's face, no, I'm never in hell working with you all again. He sort of came around, and I think Rick had a really, really good tribal council performance this episode.
yeah, because it was basically Rick that nudged them all into the like voting out Julia thing. And I thought it was really funny because Julia, I feel like when she was like, "You're such a passenger, Rick," like she kind of seals her own tomb because it's like when you call someone a passenger, that's gonna make them even more want to like get you out or like go through with what they were doing. So
Yeah, it's like very, very neat because I feel like Julie sort of starts the live tribal. Jeff is talking all about like trust and stuff. And I think it's just interesting how the last week's vote is affecting Julie so much. And like there's an article Jeff had interviewed and was talking about, and it's like Julie's a mom, doesn't like lying in her daily life. So last week's vote being left out really affected her. And we saw that play out this week when she was like crying all the time. She's like, I've hit an all-time low. And I think when she says like she doesn't think the plan she's told is happening tonight, it's like, I think her saying that she looks like a lunatic, I don't think is warranted, or like she thinks she's coming off as crazy. I'm like, wow, if that was your life and like you're coming into the game and the people that you've trusted just straight up lied to you, I think what she's feeling is totally warranted. And like, I don't know. It's
there
just
have
so
been bigger
interesting.
breakdowns on Survivor over lesser things.
Yeah.
So
So it's like, I don't think Julie should be getting slack as like, oh, she's so like loose cannon or whatever, because I think Julie, this episode, like everything she's saying is totally warranted, I feel like.
yeah, I feel like her emotions are definitely like valid. I think that maybe she could have done a better job of like kind of hiding her emotions more, just because I think that's where sometimes people get like messy. But at the same time, like I personally would want to keep around someone who like wears their heart on their sleeve because then it's easy to tell when they're going to be lying to you. So
Yeah.
I
And
also feel like women especially get a lot more flack for being called like over emotional or whatever, which is like whatever.
yeah, and I feel like with Julie too, like what you're saying, if she says what she's going to do, she's very against lying or has difficulty lying. That's a perfect person to want to have on your team because they're loyal. She jumped shipped because her team betrayed her kind of thing. And when Julie was talking, I was like, oh, this is like a lot of information she's giving out. She's sort of spilling the beans, and then Aurora starts talking, and then Julia starts talking, and like then it becomes super crazy. And I'm like, Julie is like, she doesn't think the plan that she's been told is happening tonight. And I'm like, oh my God, Keith flashbacks with stick to the plan. When this kind of stuff comes out at tribal council, all the poop is going to hit the fan. I'm like, oh my God, she's literally saying like stick to the plan. And if you aren't knowing of what Julie's plan that she's talking about is, you have to have some like red alerts going off in your mind. And then we see Kelly turn to Julia, like, are we good? And Julia obviously has to say yeah, because otherwise then you just blow up your game even more, I feel like.
I think there were two things that were like really interesting about this tribal. One, it became very obvious very quickly that there was more than one plan. And like you always kind of know that there's more than one plan, but like you know that there's more than one plan this time. And then also the fact that when they realized there was more than one plan, they actually like did something about it instead of just being like, well, I'm gonna go with my plan and hope for the best. Like they came up with an entirely new plan entirely at tribal, and I was like, wow, you guys are icons. I love it.
Yeah, like a literal 360-degree rotation. It wasn't even like, okay, they settled on Kelly or David. A whole new name came out of the hat, which is super crazy. And I think Aurora and Julia at Tribal Council, like we saw the target maybe but at Aurora at first, and then Aurora just like shut up and Julia kept talking and stuff like that. I'm like, Aurora just dodged a big bullet by just laying low after the whole fiasco started to ensue. After she started talking about the minnows and the sharks and whatever, I was like, yeah, War Dog, confusing, yes. But like what Aurora said makes sense. Like, okay, yeah, you're scared that Lesu might be coming back together and just playing you all, and then Kama needs to come back together. But yeah, I don't know. It's sort of like it's because the people have distrust in the alliance because of last week that you're saying things like that. And I think what Aurora said about Lesu banding back together, it's got to be something that you're thinking about. But I don't know if you bring that up necessarily at tribal council, unless you're trying to force Kama back together after Julia Julie says she doesn't trust you all anymore.
Yeah, I think, like we said, one of the interesting things about Lesu is that they're able to fall apart and come back together, whereas Kama, like once they fractured big. And I think like being like Lesu could come back together isn't like a threat to Kama. It's like a challenge to Lesu. Like we don't believe you're actually able to come back together, or like we know you're gonna come back together, so don't do it this time. So it's like I don't understand why she brought up Lesu because it just I don't see the strategic value in doing it, I guess.
Yeah, which is really interesting because, yeah, you should be thinking that, okay, maybe they're pulling a fast one on us and tricking us all right now, kind of thing. And it like really does go to show, I think, like the whole intentional matsing or unintentional matsing, and like how we've seen Lesu literally come down low in the numbers coming in to the merge, and then somehow the first three players at the merge that are voted out are former Kama members. And then with Julia getting voted out this week, it's like Lesu has literally even the score if they did want to come together, which it seems like Rick still isn't on board to vote with them kind of thing. But like they have even the score technically, but it seems like right now it's more voting blocks with like Gavin, Julia, Victoria, Aurora sort of in there, sort of not. And then you have a Ron and Julie group, and then you have a David and Devin's group, and then you also have a Kelly, Lauren, and War Dog group. And I think where like the Gavin, Julia, Victoria, and Aurora went wrong or misplayed this episode, I guess, it's like they didn't do a good job making any one of the other three voting blocks feel comfortable with them, because like literally they told Ron and Julie that they are either voting Kelly or David. David and Devins, did they tell them to vote Kelly? And then to Kelly, Lauren, and War Dog, they said they're voting David. So it's like you're sort of telling everyone different things, and it's like you're making all the groups think you're sketch, and you aren't really fully committed to either like voting block, which leads to the whole rice scraping scene.
Yeah, like even if I had never played Survivor before, I feel like that scene would have been like warning bells all around for me, just because it was like when you get together a group of like 10 people like that, it should never be silent. Like it was just creepy to watch.
Yeah, the whole rice scraping scene was so interesting, like almost uncomfortable to watch, like you're saying, because it was just awkward, I guess, you know? Returning player advantage of knowing what it's like to be felt like voted out. So you get those sketch signals and it's nobody eye contact, nobody talking. And yeah, I don't know. It's just such an interesting scene to watch because we usually have only like talking scenes in Survivor, but this was like dead silence. Something is up, fam.
Yeah, I just, oh, it was just really misplayed, I think. And I guess part of the reason we say it's really misplayed is because the editing showed us, like, I'm sure that there were some times when they were all at camp and it was perfectly fine, but like the editing showed us the specific scene that was like, oh, you can tell exactly where everyone's head is at. So, yeah. I do think it is really interesting, like you said, that Lesu has like evened up the numbers. Because I would really love it if like Rick was like, you know what, I'm gonna stay with Lesu. Like screw these comma guys. We can like work on cannibalizing ourselves later. Just because I love it when a tribe like comma comes in like super like gung ho, super strong, and is like, yeah, we're totally gonna win this, and then they get like crushed.
Yeah, I think, if Rick can come around, you go Rick, David, and then you keep Kelly, War Dog, Lauren, but at the end, you keep Julie and Ron and then make that your final four. So you just replace Eric and do the same thing that you're going to do, but with Julie and Ron, and then you have the 4-3 advantage at 7, and then you can vote Kelly and them out if you're David. You just need to think about like the numbers advantage at those critical points, and it's like use them until you can, I guess. I think it was interesting at the tribal council, Kelly doesn't really move seats until like sort of prompted. We see that she keeps on trying to talk to Julia and like get that plan solidified about voting David out. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting how she didn't really move until like a few minutes into this tribal council.
I thought it was interesting though because she didn't need to move. Like people were coming to her, and I feel like that's just kind of like a power symbol. Like the fact that like people were coming to Kelly. I don't know. I feel like this edit has been very favorable for Kelly. And I mean, part of that might just be like I'm seeing what I want to see, but the fact that like people were coming to her and like she got what she wanted out of this tribal, like she wasn't voted out and she didn't have to use her idol. That was like best case scenario for Kelly, I think. So
Yeah, so I think idols, if you're David, if you're Kelly, do you play an idol at the crazy tribal? I mean, I can see one hand like, yes, you don't know what's happening, and maybe you could get votes kind of thing. Like maybe they're pulling a fast one on you again. But I don't know. I'm like, if you're sort of solidified, like Kelly even said when they're reading the votes, like, oh, who would vote for David kind of thing. And you're sort of sure that, okay, this tribal's so crazy, everyone doesn't want to get voted out. So they're sort of willing, like we see everyone flips on Julia because they're just sort of willing to go with what's happening, which I think could be bad for the commas because now they've evened the numbers. But you're just like, okay, this is so crazy. Save myself. I'm willing to write down whoever's name I need to write down.
I think also like with the sharks and minnows metaphor, like a bunch of minnows get eaten at once, and I think no one wants to be like in the group of minnows that gets eaten. Like it's better just to scatter and then regroup when you can than to be the one like caught in the warpath, I think.
Oh my God.
Right? I
That's
think that like
good.
they need to be conscientious because like they keep doing that over and over where they keep like doing the as long as it's not me thing. And like that works if you're like one person who's like flipping around being like as long as it's not me, because that's kind of like what Sandra did to like win twice. But if it's like an entire group of like 3 or 4 people who are like, I'll vote for whoever as long as I don't go home, it ends up being like not good.
Yeah, because I'm like, we saw the Kelly Lauren War Dog group this episode try to maybe swing the vote back to Ron because they were thinking ahead, like, oh, if we vote David out, then, we're lower in the numbers if Kama wants to regroup next week. So we need to maybe try to switch the vote to Ron so it evens the score. And like inadvertently, they did even the score this week with the Julia vote out. So I think it's just interesting how like, yeah, the returning players are thinking like 2 steps ahead versus the newbie players are like, okay, as long as it's not me, I'll vote Julia out this week. I'm voting Eric out last week, even though I think it's sort of screwing them over in the long run because I'm like, okay, now for Gavin, we haven't even mentioned this entire episode, but good for him. He won immunity. Sort of would have been more interesting if David won immunity, but alas. But yeah, like Gavin, who is he truly aligned with to make it or win the game? He says he's close with Kelly, but we also hear him say at the top of the episode that Eric was his right-hand person and he voted him out. Like, some of these people, I'm like, I don't really see a clear path for you. I think Ron has become the ultimate GOAT. He's literally like the best person to bring to the end. We hear him say this episode, like, as long as it's not me, he's crying. He wants to be a passenger. He'll vote wherever. And I'm like, Ron, great GOAT. I think Julie could have some fight in her to get a resume, but don't want to use those words for resume. But like a lot of these people are becoming the ultimate passengers to take to the end of the game.
Yeah, it's like if this is a game of chess, Kelly and David are the king and queen, and everyone else is just their pawns. And I guess you could consider like War Dog or whomever, like people who are actually playing the game and like thinking ahead. Because I feel like War Dog is the only one of the the new players that I've seen like consistently strategizing and like consistently like doing well. So
yeah, I think War Dog, he's thinking, Devins is thinking, like we see a lot of good strategy from these people. I think Julia, just like where she, I guess, went wrong tonight, which is sort of hard because it's like, oh, tribal, this is so crazy, so much is happening. But like some of her comments that were shown when she's like, you're a passenger, Rick, or you're not part of any plans. And then right before the vote, she's like, shut up, War Dog. And I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, this is so sassy.
yeah, and it's like, what are you gaining by being rude to these people?
Yeah, right? Because if someone's like being super rude and mean to you, like, Rick, you're not part of any plans. And then Rick has the best retort. He's just like, yeah, if I'm not part of any, I should make some. Like, you're just putting fire under these people by being rude to them. Everyone has such a high thinking of what they're doing right in the game. So if you're telling people that like you're just a passenger, but they think they're a pilot, like they're not going to like that. And it's really interesting how last week we had the whole passenger pilot metaphor, and then it comes into this week. And now I feel like people are going to talk about it and use that verbiage instead of like, oh, Survivor resume, like, yeah, I was a pilot this whole game. Like, you were a passenger.
Yeah, I think it might be like contained just within this one season because they did also talk about resumes, and I feel like passenger pilot is one of those things where people feel better being like, oh, I had a passenger this whole game rather than being like, oh, I dragged along a goat. So I don't know. I agree though about how Julia was just lighting fires under people, which is, babe, what were you doing?
Yeah, so I feel like nah, I mean, it was a good, interesting episode. Julia, everyone was like, yeah, she's so strategic at the top of the episode. And that's really like the death knell. If someone at the top of the episode is like, Ron and Eric are running the game, Julia's so strategic. They're going home, haha, because it's like they literally get 0 screen time to all the screen time in one episode. And you're like, they weren't running any game. Like, we haven't seen them in 3 weeks. I didn't even know they were on this show. And then they're somehow getting all the screen time.
Yeah, I was like, Julia's a strategic mastermind? Really?
Like, oh, I only heard Joe ever say that Julia's good at challenges. Like, haha.
Yeah. So I'm interested in seeing like what happens next week as like the fallout of this, just because I feel like this vote could end up being like really good or really bad for some people. We saw in the next time thing that maybe some stuff is going to get shaken up. So they were talking about how like a monarch is going to be dethroned or something, which I find really exciting. I would love to see like one of the like big players get knocked out, except for not Kelly or David.
Which, yeah, I feel like it's interesting because, as we said last week, the game is sort of split wide open. Again, we definitely have a bunch of voting blocks, I feel like, of people who are willing to jump. And it's not just like two main alliances trying to battle it out at the final 10, but like two or three or four smaller clusters that are going to work together or not work together each week, which I think that just makes the game more interesting. And in the article that I was reading earlier, Jeff says that two people are going home next week. So whether it's a back-to-back episode or two people going home in one tribal council, and then after the first person is voted out, Jeff's like, you're not done, you're voting out another. I think it'll be really interesting.
Could also be a medevac, unless he was
Oh.
saying like two people are like
Yikes.
voted out. Like it could be a medevac, or someone could quit. So
Yeah, Eric on Extinction Island. Eric got so much screen time this episode. I'm like, wow, this is the Eric show now. Great.
I think it's so weird when they give them screen time after they go to Extinction, because then it's like, y'all already voted this boy out, and he's getting more screen time after he was voted out than he did before.
Yeah, Eric needs a sandwich. His bug eyes are getting so big on his face because his face is becoming so slim. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, but like we said, we're really excited for next episode. Put in the comments down below who you think the two people going home are, because I can't even think of one. Because I've forgotten half these players' names because they
Oh,
never show up. Like Gavin, who's he? Um, yeah, put that in the comments down below. As always, we're super excited to get to share our love of Survivor with all of you. And yeah, thanks
yeah.
for
Thank
watching.
you all so much for watching. We'll see you all next week.
Bye.